Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your guest host for today. My name is Dr. Nasir, and we've got something on tap for you today, folks. It is part 3 of our series of the Daily Wire debate between Ana Kasparian and Ben Shapiro. Part 3, and we're going to get to that next few seconds. But before we do so, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, like, share, and follow us. Put your comments on below. Everything helps us out in the algorithm so we can get these videos out to you. Make sure to see part 1 and part 2 of these, as well as all of our other videos too. Let's get to debate part 3 between Ana and Ben.
This does raise the question for me of localism versus sort of national policy. So when you point out, for example, that both parties are subject to regulatory capture or that they're subject to their own stock portfolio, some people would say, okay, elect better people. We need to, if we just elect people of this party, it'll fix it. If we elect this guy, he's going to fix it. And then there's the sort of Thomas Sowell position, which is it's not a problem of people, it's a problem of incentive structures. Incentive structures in Congress are just broken. And when you have this number of people, 435 people in Congress, who are controlling this amount of money and this amount of regulatory power, that will corrupt, right? I mean, you put that much power at the hands of a very small cadre of people, whether you're talking about in the executive branch, in the regulatory state, whether you're talking about people in the legislative branch, it's innately going to tempt them to enrich themselves and self-serve and self-heal. I mean, this is something that the founders actually were very much focused on, which was the idea the federal government was going to have very little power. And so this does raise the question of how much power you think the federal government ought to have. Because if we're talking about, kind of the solutions that get implemented, I'm a big fan of the idea that California ought to be California and Florida ought to be Florida, and basically that may be the only way that California and Florida can share a nation is if they are allowed to do what they want in their own particular purviews. But we, because of nationalized social media, and because of the amount of power that's in the federal government, we focus in on the federal government. That means that we care deeply about what happens on the federal level every single day. If you went back 200 years, no one cared who the president was because the president didn't have that much power. So what do you think of the idea of sort of delegating power back down to the states instead of centralizing back up into a central government that does have the capacity to be used by both sides for corrupt purposes, for example?
It depends. I mean, I think that, it's funny because I've always been super focused on national politics, but over the last several years, I've been a lot more honestly fascinated with what's happening in California. I think for obvious reasons, local politics is fascinating to me. And in terms of what impacts my day-to-day life, I've realized that these local decisions have more of an impact than what's happening on a federal level. There's a lot of gridlock and a lot of nonsense happening on a federal level, so I think that's part of the reason why it's not coming down to impact our lives on a daily basis. I think the federal government should be tapped.
And that's why they say all politics, retail politics is local. Fix it at the local level where you live with your community and whatever. Get the things implemented that you want, the policies that you want. Fix them at your local level. And then go from there. Once you've done it at the local level, now you can basically say, you know what, let's take this and see if this will work at a federal level. And then you decide to run for office. And then you run on the platform and say, hey, look, this is what we did over here. And look, they love it. It's working. Maybe this is something that we can take to the nation. Who knows?
Asked with important regulations to protect the consumer because greed is a thing, okay? The fiduciary responsibility to shareholders is real. And so how do you balance that with the need to protect workers and consumers? I think you need a federal government and a regulatory body to focus on that. When it comes to civil rights, you need that protection on a federal level. You can't just leave it to the states. You don't want one state to say, nah, we're not into interracial marriage. We're going to ban that. Or we don't want to, have equal rights based on, or equal rights for everyone. Some races we like more than others. You need a federal government to protect civil rights. But I do agree with you that Americans have not been paying enough attention to what's happening on a local level. There are certain things that can be dealt on a local level that doesn't need to be the responsibility of the federal government. And to be quite honest with you, with all the dysfunction and gridlock with the federal government, I think more and more people are relying on a local level to get policy passed that they desperately need.
So in a second, I want to talk to you about local politics versus national, because I think that the national politics does lead to extraordinary polarization, whereas, as we'll talk about in a moment, when it comes to local politics, everyone gets a lot more moderate when they're talking about their own particular
That's very
community.
true.
First, the debt ceiling is now above 31.4. let's talk about the local level. So, we're talking about the sort of conflict at the federal level, and federal politics tends to bring out, I think, the worst in people, mainly because it feels like, okay, for me, I'm a Floridian now, which I'm very happy about. People from New York keep trying to tell me what to do. Why can't they leave me alone, leave my children alone, leave my life alone, leave me alone? If you leave me alone in my community with people who I've chosen to live with, which means that we are going to have much more commonality of interest, we're going to come to a policy that works much better for me and my family than people who live 1,000 miles away and who don't know me, don't know my family, don't care about me. And I think that, that return to localism may be the only way forward for the country. I want to talk to you about what's happening in LA. So obviously, I grew up in LA. I spent my entire life in LA until 2 years ago when I picked up my entire family and moved over here. Now my parents live here, my in-laws live here, 2 of my sisters live here. There's been a mad rush to Florida, particularly by people who are sort of the red state mentality. But I don't think it's purely about like I needed to be in a conservative area. Again, I'd lived my entire life only in blue areas, whether it was Los Angeles or Cambridge, Massachusetts when I was in law school. And so the thing that drove me out of California is I think one of the things that you've been picking up on and getting a lot of flack from your own side for picking up on, and that is that LA has just become a trash heap. I mean, it's been governed awfully. Forget about who's governing it.
Right.
The policies that have been used to govern it are just terrible. You have an increase in crime. Homelessness has taken over the streets. When I was living there, I mean, I've pretty famously talked about this. And it was the kind of place where I had a very nice house in a pretty decent neighborhood, and we had a gate in the front. And we would open the gate, and there would be a homeless person face down in the gutter, Edgar Allan Poe style, or there would be a guy outside the house shooting heroin into his foot. And I've got like a 5-year-old. And this sort of stuff has become incredibly common in LA. You noticed it, and you've been getting all sorts of flack for it.
Right, because when there are problems in society, we need solutions. And you can't find solutions unless you acknowledge what the problem is and then properly diagnose it. So my biggest issue right now, at least with the way the left has handled the discussion on homelessness in places like Los Angeles, is there's this housing first mentality where, everything would be fine as long as we put everyone in housing. And by the way, let me just note, housing is an important component to this. There is a housing crisis. There's a lack of inventory. I think we all know that. We do need to build more housing. But at the same time, treating the homeless population as if it's a monolith has been a complete failure. There is a huge mental health crisis happening in this country. So people with severe mental health issues are just left to die on the streets. And in some cases, because they are experiencing an episode, they could carry out some sort of act of violence and assault someone. And it's a dangerous situation for everyone, okay? The people who are just trying to go about their day and the person who is left on the streets battling with this untreated mental health issue. There are people who are obviously struggling with drug addiction, and you look at the number of overdose deaths, and it has skyrocketed. The approach that we have implemented is clearly not working. More people are dying. And I get so much flack for saying this. I want an actual solution. It is insanely cruel to watch people die on our streets and then give yourself a pat on the back because you think you did something compassionate. That is not compassionate. There's this insanity right now where, let's say we're talking about the same person struggling with a severe mental health issue. They're living on the streets. Asking them if they are willing to take the housing that's offered to them. But someone who has a severe mental health issue, I know the left would argue, if they engaged in some sort of sexual act with someone, the person who engaged in that act with that person with the mental health issue took advantage because that person with a severe mental health issue does not have the ability to consent. But somehow we're just going to take their word at face value when it comes to housing. No, we need to get that person help. They need help. And I don't care how vicious people think I am for saying that. It's just common sense. It really is. And denying that the problem...
And here I would basically say, Anna, she's stating the problem absolutely succinctly, clearly, precisely. She's putting it out there. And we all know this on the right. And when we propose solutions, the people on the left don't want to listen to it because they say that we're out of touch, that we hate those people, that we're evil. We don't understand the situation. And as Anna said, it's just housing. All you do is put somebody into a house and the problem's fixed. Everything else goes away. And that's just not true. That is not true at all. You don't fix a problem of somebody with a mental illness and basically say, okay, here's a house, here's a home, go live your life. I mean, who does that? And all these policies that have caused the situation to exacerbate the way that it has, to grow multifold in dimension, these policies have all been put into place. And I don't mean to sound, everyone's going to say, oh, but Dr. Nasser, all you're doing is blaming the left. Well, there's blame to be put on the right as well, on Republicans too. But the majority of the time, like it said, is that this is that local politics. It's what's happening right now in Los Angeles, what's happening in San Francisco, what's happening in Detroit, what's happening in, Baltimore, what's happening in Austin, in Texas. I mean, just take a look at these states, in Chicago, take a look at the states. To the extent of the problems that are occurring, where states are being run by Democrats that are in blue controlled legislatures, I would venture to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, put it down in the comments below, let me know. I'm willing to take a look. I have not looked into this right now. It's something that I will do, but I would venture to say that those cities that are run by Democratic legislatures are so much more worse off than those cities that are being run by red state legislatures. Just saying, folks, just saying.
Problem exists is the other part of this, right? Denying that there was definitely an increase in crime in big cities drives me crazy. I was assaulted in my own neighborhood. I shared the story. I was shocked at the kind of reaction I got from people who I typically agree with politically. Took my dog out for a walk. Two guys who were clearly on something. They appeared to be homeless, were walking by me or behind me as I was bending over to pick up my dog's mess. One of the guys grabbed me by the hips and started thrusting at me with an erection. And I know that I wasn't raped, I get it. But at the same time,
That's not the standard.
Something like that for a woman who does not have the ability to defend herself in that moment. I had no weapon, no nothing. I have to think about that at least twice a day when I take my dog out for a walk. It is traumatizing. Yes, I've gone to therapy about it, I'm working through it.
But that's not your personal problem. That's because you were assaulted, yes.
What's making it worse, though, is that I'm the bad guy for sharing this story and saying, hey, we can't just let this kind of stuff happen. We need to find real solutions for it.
And that is oh my goodness. Wow. I had no idea. And but these are the policies that the leftists have put into place. And like she said, if you shared this story and you were on the right, there's not a single person, okay, on the right, not a single conservative, not a single Republican, okay, that would have basically said, how dare you talk about this? Keep that thing quiet. That's not to be talked about. Oh, you're going to mess up the narrative. But it happened to her. She was assaulted. And thank God it wasn't a sex. But like you said, it doesn't matter. She was assaulted in a neighborhood where you're walking your dog. I mean, God forbid something worse could have happened. So the question is, and she says she brings it up, and she's the one that is being, I guess, verbally assaulted on the social media platforms, on Twitter, and wherever else wherever else, from leftists, basically telling her to shut up. What are you talking about? You shouldn't be bringing that thing up, because when she talks about this thing happening, it is those policies that have been put in place in those blue areas, those blue legislatures, blue policymakers, Democrats predominantly, leftists, liberals, progressives, that have put these policies in place that allow this situation to occur, where you can't walk the streets and be safe anymore, especially if you're a woman. And she talked about she didn't have a weapon or a gun. Now, I don't know what Anna's position is on the Second Amendment, but you know what? She ought to be seriously thinking, but you know what? Maybe she can't, because if she starts carrying a gun or goes for a permit, you know what? She's going to be even more lambasted by people on the left, because I'm not exactly sure where she stands on personal protection or on I know on the Second Amendment, I think she's against it. I'd have to check and see, but I would just venture to guess that if you toss a coin up in the air, you know what, and say yes or no, I'd be willing to bet on a safe bet that she's probably not, that she's against the Second Amendment and maybe against carrying, a concealed weapon. But what else are you going to do in those areas? You got to protect yourself or let yourself, at the mercy of the criminal element. You can't be doing that. Anyways, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. This was part 3 of the debate between Anna and Ben at the Daily Wire. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, like, share, and follow us. Comment below. Let us know what you think. And I'll give you my final thought, which is, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. We'll see you again next time, folks. Take care and stay safe.